Elena Pearson sat alone in the empty airport terminal, her one suitcase beside her. It was 2:17 a.m., and the man who had promised to meet her, the man who had paid for her to travel across the world, was nowhere to be found. Just a text message. "You look older than your photos. Don't contact me again." After 15 years of correspondence, after selling everything she owned, after leaving her entire life behind in Russia, Elena was abandoned in a strange country because of a few wrinkles around her eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But fate has mysterious ways of turning our greatest disappointments into unexpected blessings. This is the story of how Elena Pearson found herself stranded in Boston with nowhere to go, and how Thomas Reynolds, a man 8 years her junior, saw beyond her age to the extraordinary soul within. Elena had always been pragmatic about love. Growing up in a small town outside of St. Petersburg, she had watched her mother struggle after her father's unexpected death. Life was hard for single women in Russia, especially as they aged. When Elena turned 35 and found herself still unmarried, with job prospects dwindling due to the subtle age discrimination that plagued professional women, she made a decision that many might judge, but few would truly understand. She created a profile on an international matchmaking website. Her profile was honest, mostly. Elena listed her real interests: classical literature, gardening, and cooking traditional Russian dishes. She included her actual education, a master's degree in literature from a respected university. She uploaded recent photos that captured her warm smile and kind eyes. But when it came to her age, Elena hesitated before typing 30 instead of 35. It wasn't a massive lie, she reasoned. Just a small adjustment to get past the initial filters many Western men set when searching for potential matches. Within days, she began corresponding with Richard Blackwell, a 52-year-old accountant from Boston. He seemed kind, stable, and genuinely interested in her as a person. Their emails were thoughtful and increasingly intimate. They progressed to video calls, though Elena was careful about lighting and angles. Richard talked about his spacious home, his successful accounting practice, his desire for companionship in his later years. Elena shared stories about her teaching career, her dreams of traveling, her hope for a family before it was too late. For 15 years, they maintained this long-distance relationship. Richard sent her money occasionally, small amounts to help with rent when Elena lost her teaching position, larger sums when her mother fell ill. He promised that someday, when the time was right, he would bring her to America. Elena's friends warned her that she was being strung along, but she chose to believe in Richard's promises. What other choice did she have? The years were passing, and her prospects in Russia were growing dimmer. Then, just after Elena's 50th birthday, though Richard believed she was 45, he finally sent the email she had been waiting for. He had secured her a fiancé visa. He had purchased her plane ticket. He was ready to marry her and begin their life together. Elena sold her small apartment, gave away most of her possessions, and packed her life into a single suitcase. She said goodbye to her few remaining friends and the grave of her mother. The night before her departure, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, examining the lines that had formed around her eyes, the strands of grey she carefully colored every 3 weeks, the slight softening of her jawline. Would Richard notice? Would he care? 15 years of correspondence had to mean something, she reassured herself. Their connection went deeper than physical appearance. The flight from St. Petersburg to Boston was the longest of Elena's life. Not just in hours, though the 13-hour journey with a layover in London was indeed exhausting, but in emotional weight. Every minute brought her closer to a new life, to the man who had occupied her heart and mind for a decade and a half, to a future she had almost stopped believing could be hers. When she landed at Logan International Airport at 11:43 p.m., Elena's hands trembled as she navigated customs. Her English was good but accented, and she rehearsed what she would say to the stern-faced immigration officers. The fiancé visa process went smoothly. Richard had arranged everything meticulously, and by 1:30 a.m., Elena was standing in the arrivals area, scanning the sparse crowd for the face she knew from countless video calls, but Richard wasn't there. Elena checked her phone and found a text message that had arrived while she was in customs. There was no greeting, no explanation, just 11 cold words that collapsed 15 years of hope. "You look older than your photos. Don't contact me again." She tried calling him immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent messages pleading for him to respond, to at least talk to her, to remember their years of connection. No response. Elena sank onto a hard plastic seat in the nearly deserted terminal, her suitcase at her feet, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and faced reality. She was alone in a foreign country, with about $3,000 to her name, all the money she had managed to save and obtain from selling her possessions. By 2:30 a.m., Elena had formulated a plan. She would find an inexpensive hotel for the night, and in the morning she would look for someplace more permanent to stay while she figured out what to do next. Going back to Russia wasn't an option. She had nothing to return to. She would have to make a life here somehow, visa complications notwithstanding. As she was about to call for a taxi, a young man in an airport custodian's uniform approached her. He had noticed her sitting alone for over an hour and had seen her tears. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you all right? Do you need help?" His voice was gentle, his expression genuinely concerned. Elena hesitated. She had always been cautious, and accepting help from a stranger in a foreign country seemed unwise. But there was something in his eyes, a kindness that reminded her of her father, that made her decide to trust him, at least with the basic outline of her situation. I was supposed to meet someone, but he did not come." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "I need to find a hotel for tonight." The young man, his name tag read Thomas, nodded thoughtfully. "The hotels near the airport are pretty expensive. There's a decent hostel in the city that's much more affordable. I can call you a taxi if you'd like." Thomas helped her find a reputable hostel and wrote down the address for her to give to the taxi driver. As she was about to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "My mother runs a boarding house in Dorchester. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe, and she charges a lot less than most places in Boston. If you need a place to stay for longer than a few days, give her a call. Tell her Tommy sent you." Elena accepted the card, touched by this unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Thomas. You are very kind to help a stranger." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his tired eyes. "We were all strangers once, right? Safe travels, ma'am." The hostel was basic but clean, and Elena spent her first night in America staring at the ceiling of a shared room, listening to the soft snores of 3 other women travelers. Sleep eluded her as her mind raced through options. She could try to find a job, though her visa situation complicated matters. She could reach out to the few distant connections she had in America, former students who had moved to the States, though none were in Boston. Or she could go to the Russian consulate and ask for help returning home, though the thought filled her with shame. Morning came, and with it a renewed determination. Elena had not survived the collapse of the Soviet Union, the loss of both parents, and 15 years of deferred dreams to give up now. She would find a way forward. After a sparse breakfast at the hostel, Eleanor decided to call the number on Thomas's card. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice brisk but not unfriendly. Reynolds boarding house, Margaret speaking. Hello, my name is Elena Pearson. Your son Thomas gave me this number last night. He said, you might have a room available? There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice softened slightly. Tommy mentioned he'd met someone who needed a place. He's got a soft heart, that boy. Yes, I do have a room. It's small, but it's private. $650 a month, utilities included. I serve breakfast, but other meals are your responsibility. No smoking, no overnight guests, quiet hours after 10 p.m. Can you manage that? The price was higher than Elena had hoped, but still much lower than anything else she'd seen online. Yes, I can manage. When could I see the room? Tommy finishes. His shift at noon. He can bring you by afterward if that works for you. And so, at 12:30 p.m., Elena found herself in Thomas's battered Ford Taurus, heading to Dorchester. In daylight, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps early 40s to her 50 years. He had kind brown eyes, the same warm smile she remembered from the night before, and a quiet, unassuming manner that put her at ease. Thank you again for your help, Elena said, as they navigated the unfamiliar streets. I was not prepared to be alone here. Thomas glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. If you don't mind me asking, what happened? Were you supposed to meet my family? Elena considered how much to share. Not family, a man I had been corresponding with for many years. We were to be married, but when he saw me at the airport, she trailed off, the humiliation still fresh. Thomas frowned. He stood you up at the airport after you came all this way. The indignation in his voice was oddly comforting to Elena. What kind of man does that? A man who expected someone younger, I think. The words tasted bitter. The rest of the drive passed in companionable silence. When they arrived at the boarding house, a well-maintained Victorian home with a small front garden, Thomas carried her suitcase up the steps with a quiet deference that touched Elena deeply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Margaret Reynolds was a sturdy woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in, a practical bun, and the same kind eyes as her son. She showed Elena to a small but tidy room on the second floor, with a twin bed, a dresser, a desk, and a window overlooking the garden. Bathrooms shared with one other tenant, Mrs. Chen. She's a widow, keeps to herself mostly. Breakfast is at 7 a.m. sharp. I don't wait for stragglers. Margaret's tone was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. Tommy tells me you're from Russia? Yes, from near St. Petersburg. Margaret nodded. My late husband had a buddy in the Navy who married a Russian woman. Toughest lady I ever met. Grew her own vegetables, made her own clothes, never complained about anything. She gave Elena an appraising look. You've got that same look about you. You'll do fine here. And with that assessment, Elena was welcomed into the Reynolds household. The first few weeks were a blur of practical challenges Elena had to navigate, the complications of her visa status. Technically, she was in the country legally, but without Richard to sponsor her, her future was uncertain. She found a pro bono immigration lawyer through a community center who helped her understand her options. She opened a bank account, got a library card, and began the process of rebuilding her life from scratch. Throughout it all, the Reynolds family provided an unexpected support system. Margaret, though gruff, was unfailingly fair and often slipped extra food onto Elena's plate at breakfast, claiming she needed to put some meat on those bones. Thomas, who worked nights at the airport and took classes during the day, pursuing a long-delayed degree in engineering, often found small ways to make Eleanor feel welcome, bringing home Russian tea he'd found at a specialty store, helping her navigate the public transportation system and introducing her to trusted neighbors. Elena found herself drawn to Thomas in a way that surprised her. It wasn't romantic, or at least she didn't allow herself to think of it that way. He was at least 8 years younger, and she had no illusions about her appeal to a man in his prime. But his kindness, his quiet intelligence, and his genuine interest in her stories about Russia created a friendship that became increasingly precious to her. 1 month after her arrival, Elena found a job at a small bookstore owned by a retired professor who valued her knowledge of Russian literature and didn't look too closely at her visa situation. The pay was modest, but combined with her dwindling savings, it was enough to maintain her room at the boarding house and begin to build a semblance of stability. In the evenings, she often sat in the boarding house's small back garden, reading or simply watching the changing seasons. Thomas sometimes joined her, bringing coffee or tea, and they would talk about their days or sit in comfortable silence. On one such evening in early autumn, as the leaves were just beginning to turn, Thomas asked the question Elena had been dreading. "Elena, can I ask you something personal?" His voice was hesitant, his hands cradling a mug of tea. She nodded, though her chest tightened with apprehension. "The man who was supposed to meet you at the airport, you said you'd been corresponding for years. How did you meet him?" Elena looked down at her hands, suddenly ashamed. It was a matchmaking website for international marriages. She couldn't bring herself to say mail-order bride, though that's what many would call it. To her surprise, Thomas didn't look shocked or judgmental. He simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. That must have taken a lot of courage to be willing to leave everything familiar behind for a chance at a new life. His understanding brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. It was not courage. It was desperation, perhaps. In Russia, a woman my age has few options. I thought Richard, that was his name. I thought he saw value in me beyond youth. We talked about books, about ideas. I thought he knew me. She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by her emotion. But in the end, all he saw was my age. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "His loss," he finally said, with such conviction that Eleanor looked up, startled. "Anyone who can't see past something as meaningless as a number to the person you are isn't worth your tears, Elena." In that moment, with the setting sun casting a golden glow over Thomas's earnest face, Elena felt something shift in her heart. Not hope exactly, she was too practical for that, but perhaps the tiny seed of possibility that her value wasn't defined by her youth or her ability to be some man's trophy, that perhaps in this unexpected place she might find not just survival but a genuine connection. But she quickly tamped down the feeling. Thomas was being kind, that was all. He saw her as a friend, perhaps even as someone to be protected, like one of his mother's strays. She would not mistake kindness for something more and risk the fragile stability she was building. As autumn deepened into winter, Elena's life fell into a rhythm. Work at the bookstore, evenings at the boarding house, occasional outings with Mrs. Chen to the local farmers' market or with Margaret to her church's community events. Her English improved, her confidence grew, and she began to feel less like an interloper and more like someone who belonged. And through it all, her friendship with Thomas deepened in ways both subtle and profound. He brought her to his engineering school's international festival, proudly introducing her to his classmates and professors. She helped him study for his thermodynamics exam, drawing on knowledge from her own university days. When he caught a bad flu in December, she made him her mother's chicken soup with dill and sour cream, sitting by his bed and reading to him when the fever made his head pound too much to look at screens. They were friends, good friends. And Elena told herself that was enough, more than enough, given where she had been just a few months earlier. She would not be greedy for more than the universe had already granted her. January brought heavy snowfall to Boston, transforming the city into a winter wonderland that delighted Elena. despite the bitter cold. Having grown up with Russian winters, she found Boston's weather mild by comparison and often laughed at the locals bundled in their heavy parkas. "You call this cold?" she teased Thomas one evening as they walked back from the subway station, snowflakes catching in her silver-streaked hair. In St. Petersburg, this would be a spring day. Thomas grinned, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Show off. Not all of us had the benefit of a Russian upbringing to toughen us up. These moments of easy companionship had become the highlight of Elena's days. What had begun as gratitude toward a kind stranger had evolved into something deeper, a friendship, based on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. At the bookstore, Elena had proven herself invaluable. Her employer, Dr. William Foster, a retired literature professor with a passion for rare books, appreciated her extensive knowledge and impeccable organizational skills. When he discovered her background in Russian literature, he gave her the responsibility of curating a special section dedicated to translated works from Eastern Europe. Sales increased as Elena's passionate recommendations drew in customers seeking something beyond the usual bestsellers. "You have a gift," Dr. Foster told her one quiet afternoon as they catalogued a new shipment. "You connect people with the perfect book, one they didn't even know they were looking for." Elena blushed at the praise. "Books were my escape when I was young. During the hardest years after the Soviet collapse, when there was little food and less hope, I could disappear into Tolstoy or Chekhov and forget our troubles for a while." She ran her fingers gently over the spine of a well-worn copy of the Master and Margarita. "Books are more than paper and ink. They are doorways to other lives, other possibilities." Dr. Foster studied her thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered writing yourself? You have a storyteller's soul." The suggestion startled Elena. "Write? Me? No, I have never thought." She trailed off, considering. In her youth, she had filled journals with poems and fragments of stories, but life's demands had pushed those dreams aside. "Perhaps someday," she conceded with a small smile. As January turned to February, Elena received an unexpected email from Richard Blackwell. After months of silence, his name in her inbox made her hands tremble as she opened the message. "Elena, I've been thinking about you. I made a terrible mistake that night at the airport. I was shocked by how much you'd aged since your photos, and I reacted poorly. I'd like to meet and discuss giving our relationship another chance. Boston isn't working out for me anymore. I'm planning to relocate to Florida and would still consider bringing you with me as we discussed. Let me know if you're interested in meeting for coffee." Elena read the message 3 times, emotions churning through her, rage, hurt, and beneath it all, a strange sense of pity for this shallow man she had once thought she could love. She closed her laptop without responding and went for a long walk through the snowy streets, trying to sort through her feelings. By the time she returned to the boarding house, she had made her decision. Richard deserved no response. He had discarded her without a second thought after 15 years of promises, leaving her stranded in a foreign country. That he now considered her worthy of a second chance, only because his other plans had fallen through, was the final insult. Elena deleted the email and blocked his address, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she did so. That evening, when Thomas invited her to join him for their usual Friday movie night in the boarding house's small common room, Eleanor suggested they go out instead. "There is a Russian film festival at the university cinema," she said. "Would you be interested? We could have dinner first at that little cafe you mentioned." Thomas looked surprised but pleased. "That sounds great. It's about time I experienced some real Russian culture beyond your mother's soup recipe." The evening marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Away from the boarding house, seated across from each other in the warm glow of cafe candlelight, Elena saw Thomas with new, eyes. He was dressed more carefully than usual, in a button-down shirt that brought out the rich brown of his eyes. He listened intently as she explained the historical context of the film they would be seeing, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. For the first time, Elena allowed herself to acknowledge the flutter in her chest. When Thomas smiled at her, it was a dangerous feeling. She had been burned badly enough by romantic hopes, but she couldn't deny its presence. At the cinema, they found themselves in a crowd of mainly college students and professors. Elena felt acutely aware of her age, especially when a young woman looked at her and Thomas with a confused expression, clearly trying to determine their relationship. Mother and son, aunt and nephew. The assumption stung, even though Elena knew it was natural. The film was a visually stunning retelling of a traditional Russian folktale, with minimal dialogue and haunting music. Halfway through, during a particularly moving scene, Thomas reached over and gently squeezed Eleanor's hand. The gesture was likely meant as simple comfort. The scene depicted a mother's grief over losing her child, but Eleanor found herself unable to concentrate on the film afterward, her hand tingling where he had touched it. On the subway ride home, they discussed the film, but Elena was distracted, wondering if she was imagining the new tension between them. When they reached the boarding house, Thomas walked her to her room as usual, but instead of his customary friendly nod before leaving, he hesitated. "I had a really good time tonight, Elena," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We should do it again sometime. Maybe that new Mediterranean place that opened up near your bookstore." Elena's heart raced as she tried to interpret his meaning. Was he asking her on a date, or was this just an extension of their friendship? She was out of practice with such nuances, particularly in a foreign culture. "I would like that," she replied simply, deciding not to overthink the moment. Thomas smiled, and for an instant, Eleanor thought he might lean in to kiss her cheek. Instead, he gave her arm a gentle squeeze. "Good night, Eleanor. Sweet dreams." As February progressed, Elena found herself spending more time in front of the mirror, noticing things she hadn't cared about in years. The deepening lines around her eyes, the softness beneath her chin, the grey strands that were becoming more prominent despite her regular coloring. She began applying the expensive moisturizer she had been saving for special occasions, and one Saturday she visited a salon to have her hair styled in a more modern cut. When Thomas commented on the change, "Your hair looks great, Elena. It really brings out your cheekbones." She blushed like a schoolgirl, simultaneously delighted and mortified by her reaction. Margaret noticed the changes too, eyeing Elena speculatively over breakfast one morning. "New haircut, new sweater, new lipstick. Anyone would think you were trying to impress someone," she commented, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. Elena focused intently on her oatmeal. The sweater was on sale, very practical for winter. Margaret snorted softly. "Sure it was, and I suppose it's just a coincidence that it's the exact shade of blue Tommy mentioned liking last week." Elena's head snapped up in surprise, earning a knowing smile from Margaret. "I'm old, dear, not blind or deaf. My son hasn't stopped talking about you for weeks. Just be careful with him, will you? He's got a tender heart under all that practicality." The conversation left Elena in turmoil. Was Margaret warning her away from her son or giving her blessing? And was she really so transparent that even the boarding house matriarch had noticed her growing feelings? Meanwhile, Elena's professional life continued to flourish. Dr. Foster, impressed with her work on the Eastern European section, offered her additional hours and a small raise. One afternoon, he introduced her to a former colleague who ran a literary translation service. "Elena has an extraordinary feel for language," Dr. Foster told his friend. "Her English is excellent, and her insights into Russian literature are remarkable. I think she'd be perfect for that Chekhov project you mentioned." To Elena's delight, she was offered freelance work translating a collection of lesser-known Chekhov short stories for an academic publication. The work was challenging and deeply satisfying, connecting her to her roots while building a bridge to her new life. As Elena's first year in America approached, she faced a crucial decision about her visa status. Her fiancé visa had technically expired, but her immigration lawyer had helped her apply for an extension based on humanitarian grounds, given the circumstances of her arrival. The process was uncertain, however, and Elena lived with the constant anxiety that she might be forced to leave the life she was carefully building. Thomas, aware of her worries, began researching alternatives. "What about applying for a visa?" he suggested one evening as they shared tea in the garden. "With your translation work and position at the bookstore, you might qualify," Eleanor sighed. "Perhaps. But such visas are difficult to obtain and usually require employer sponsorship. Dr. Foster's bookstore is too small to navigate such bureaucracy, and the translation work is freelance, not formal employment." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "There are other options, you know, such as—" He hesitated. "Marriage to a U.S. citizen would resolve your visa issues immediately." Elena nearly choked on her tea. "Thomas, I won't marry someone just for papers. That would be dishonest and disrespectful to the institution of marriage, even if there were genuine feelings involved," Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Elena studied his face, trying to read his intentions behind the causal question. "Hypothetically, I suppose that would be different, but it's still complicated." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Elena couldn't stop thinking about it later that night as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Was Thomas simply being helpful, or was there something more behind his suggestion? And if there was something more, was she ready to open herself to that possibility? In early March, Eleanor received an unexpected invitation from Dr. Foster to attend a literary fundraiser at the Boston Public Library. "It's a fancy affair. Black tie, champagne, the works," he told her. "Several publishers and literary agents will be there. With your background and translation work, you should meet them. Who knows what opportunities might arise?" Elena was both excited and terrified. She had nothing appropriate to wear for such an event, and the thought of networking with literary professionals in her still accented English was daunting. When she mentioned the invitation to Margaret, the older woman immediately took charge. "We're going shopping," she announced. "My sister Irene is about your size, and she has excellent taste. She can help us find something suitable without breaking the bank." To Elena's surprise, the shopping expedition with Margaret and her sister was enjoyable. Irene, a retired fashion buyer with an eye for quality, guided Elena away from the matronly styles she would have chosen for herself and toward more flattering contemporary designs. "Age is just a number," Irene declared, when Elena hesitated, over a midnight blue dress with a subtle side slit. "It's how you carry yourself that matters. This color makes your eyes look like sapphires." In the end, Eleanor purchased the blue dress with money she had carefully saved from her translation work. It was more than she had spent on herself in years, but when she tried it on at home and saw Thomas's expression as she descended the stairs, she knew it had been worth every penny. "Wow," he said simply, his eyes wide. "You look incredible." The evening of the fundraiser arrived, and Elena found herself in the magnificent interior of the Boston Public Library. Surrounded by the city's literary elite, Dr. Foster introduced her to colleagues and contacts, proudly mentioning her translation work and expertise in Russian literature. To her surprise, several people expressed genuine interest in her background and current projects. A distinguished woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, who introduced herself as the acquisitions editor for a prestigious university press, engaged Elena in a lengthy conversation about Chekhov. "We've been looking for someone with your specific Expertise, she mentioned as they parted. Would you be interested in consulting on an anthology we're planning? Here's my card. Email me next week if you'd like to discuss details. Elena felt light-headed with excitement as she stepped onto the library's terrace for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear and cool, the city lights sparkling below. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt not just like a survivor, but like someone with a future built on her knowledge and skills, not on her relationship to a man. As she stood there absorbing this revelation, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Enjoying the view, she turned to find Thomas, handsome in a rented tuxedo, standing in the terrace doorway. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" He smiled as he joined her at the railing. "Dr. Foster called me. He thought you might appreciate a friendly face, and he happened to have an extra ticket." He looked out at the cityscape. "Plus, I've never been inside the library after hours. It's pretty amazing." Elena studied his profile in the dim light. "You came all this way? Rented a tuxedo just to provide me with a friendly face?" Thomas turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Elena, I think we both know I didn't come here just as a friend." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than makes sense, given everything." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had come to find endearing. "I know there are complications. Your visa situation, our age difference, my mother's boarding house rules about no fraternization between tenants." Elena couldn't help but laugh at the last item on his list, breaking some of the tension between them. Thomas smiled, encouraged by her reaction. "The thing is, none of that matters to me. What matters is that you're the most fascinating, resilient, intelligent woman I've ever met. I find myself thinking about you all the time. What you'd think of a book I'm reading, how you'd react to something I saw on the subway, whether you'd like the coffee at this new place near campus." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. After years of pragmatic decisions and compromised dreams, after being rejected for the sin of aging naturally, after rebuilding her life from scratch in a foreign country, here was this wonderful man telling her that she mattered to him. Not for her utility or appearance, but for her mind, her character, her essence. "Thomas, She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I care for you, too, very much, but I'm 50 years old. You're 42, I can't have children. I might be deported. I have wrinkles and grey hair and—" He stepped closer, gently, placing a finger over her lips to stop the litany of objections. "Elena, I'm not looking for a baby factory or a trophy wife. I'm looking for a partner who challenges me intellectually, who makes me laugh, who sees the world in ways I never considered. I'm looking for you." And there on the library terrace, with the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars, Thomas Reynolds kissed Elena Pearson for the first time. It was a gentle kiss, respectful but unmistakably romantic, and Elena found herself responding with a passion she had thought long extinguished. When they finally parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "So, what do you think? Should we give this a try?" Elena thought of all the practical obstacles, all the potential complications, all the ways this unexpected happiness might unravel. Then she thought of the courage it had taken to leave Russia, to start over at 50, to build a new life from nothing. Surely this leap of faith required no less courage, but promised far greater joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's give it a try." As they walked back into the glow of the library, hand in hand, Elena felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with physical places and everything to do with the heart. Her journey had begun with pragmatic desperation, a mail-order bride seeking security in a foreign land. but had led her to something far more precious. A connection based not on convenience or transaction, but on genuine recognition of her innermost self. For the first time in many years, Elena allowed herself to believe in possibilities rather than limitations. And as Thomas squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting all the warmth and admiration she had never expected to find, she realized that sometimes life's cruelest rejections can lead to its greatest gifts, if only we have the courage to keep our hearts open to unexpected love. Spring arrived in Boston with a burst of cherry blossoms and new beginnings. For Elena and Thomas, navigating their fledgling relationship meant overcoming both practical obstacles and emotional barriers built from past disappointments. Margaret Reynolds was the first hurdle. The morning after the library fundraiser, Elena and Thomas sat down with Margaret at the kitchen table, prepared for her disapproval. "Mom, Elena and I have something to tell you," Thomas began, his hand finding Elena's under the table. Margaret set down her coffee mug with deliberate care. "If you're about to tell me you two are seeing each other, you can save your breath. I've been watching this develop for months." Eleanor and Thomas exchanged surprised glances. "You're not upset?" Thomas asked cautiously. Margaret snorted. "Why would I be upset? Elena's the best thing that's happened to you since you finally decided to go back to school." She turned her sharp gaze to Elena. "And you've been walking around with a cloud over your head since you arrived. It's nice to see the sun shining again." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected acceptance. "But your rule about tenants, oh, that," Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "That rule was made after the Johnson brothers got into a fist fight over the widow Simmons in '98, nearly destroyed my dining room. Somehow I don't think that's a concern here." Her expression softened slightly. "Just be discreet, will you? Mrs. Chen is traditional, and I don't need drama." With Margaret's blessing, one worry was eliminated, but others remained. The most pressing was Elena's visa situation. Despite her lawyer's efforts, her extension application was moving slowly through the bureaucratic system, and the uncertainty cast a shadow over her growing happiness. "I could be sent back to Russia at any time," she told Thomas one evening, as they walked along the Charles River, cherry blossoms drifting around them like pink snow. "Everything I'm building here, my work, my new friends, us, it could all disappear with one letter from Immigration Services." Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching a rowing team glide across the water. "We could get married," he said finally, his voice casual despite the weight of the suggestion. Elena stopped walking. "Thomas, no. We've only been together for a few weeks. Marriage is serious, too serious to rush into because of visa problems." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know it's fast, but I also know how I feel about you. And it's not just about the visa, that's just the timing." He squeezed her hands gently. "But I won't push. It's an option, that's all. We can figure out alternatives." Elena was touched by his understanding, even as a small part of her wondered if she was being foolish to reject such a practical solution. But the memory of her arrangement with Richard, the years of correspondence leading to cruel rejection, made her wary of any relationship founded on practicality rather than love, given time to mature naturally. Instead, they focused on other approaches. Elena's translation work was gaining recognition, and Dr. Foster suggested they explore the possibility of a cultural exchange visa sponsored by the university press that had expressed interest in her expertise. It was a long shot, but it offered hope. Meanwhile, their relationship deepened through small, everyday intimacies. Thomas began spending his free evenings at the bookstore, studying engineering textbooks in a corner while Elena worked. On Sundays, they explored Boston's neighborhoods, discovering hidden parks and ethnic restaurants where Eleanor could practice her expanding culinary vocabulary. At the boarding house, they maintained the discretion Margaret had requested, but their growing closeness was evident to everyone. In late April, Dr. Foster approached Elena with an unexpected proposal. A visiting professor from Moscow was scheduled to give a series of lectures on contemporary Russian literature at Boston University, but had fallen ill. The department was seeking a last-minute replacement. "I mentioned your name," Dr. Foster told her. "Your translation work has impressed several faculty members. They're interested in having you give at least one lecture, possibly more if you're willing." Elena was stunned. "Me? A university lecture? But I'm not an academic, not anymore. It's been years since I taught." "But you know the material. That's what matters. They're particularly interested in your perspective on how Russian literature has evolved since the Soviet era. It's a unique viewpoint that most American professors lack." The opportunity thrilled and terrified Elena in equal measure. Standing before a hall of students and faculty at a prestigious American university seemed like an impossible leap from where she had been just months ago. Yet it also represented recognition of her knowledge and expertise, recognition she had longed for during those difficult years in Russia when her age had increasingly made her invisible. She accepted the challenge, spending every spare moment preparing her lecture on the transformation of Russian literary themes from the Soviet period through the turbulent 1990s to the present day. Thomas helped her practice in the evenings, asking insightful questions and offering feedback on parts that might be difficult for American students to grasp without additional context. The night before her lecture, Elena barely slept, her mind racing with worry. What if her accent was too strong? What if students found her boring? What if she froze in front of everyone? "You'll be brilliant," Thomas assured her over breakfast, passing her a cup of strong coffee. "You know this material better than anyone. Just speak from your heart the way you do when you tell me about books you love." Elena managed a nervous smile. "My heart is currently trying to escape my chest." "That's just proof you care," he replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Channel that energy into your words." The lecture hall was more crowded than Elena had expected, with students filling nearly every seat and several faculty members seated in the back row. As she approached the podium, her legs felt like water, but once she began speaking about the literature that had shaped her life, her nervousness receded. She spoke of Bulgakov's subversive masterpiece, The Master and Margarita, written during Stalin's regime, but published decades later. She traced the themes of identity and disillusionment through Soviet and post-Soviet works, weaving in personal anecdotes about reading samizdat copies of banned books passed secretly among trusted friends during her university days. When she opened the floor for questions, hands shot up throughout the hall. The students were engaged, curious, eager to understand perspectives different from their own. One young woman thanked Elena for helping her understand her own Russian grandmother's complex relationship with their homeland's literature. As the session ended, the department chair approached, her expression warm. "That was exceptional, Ms. Pearson. Would you consider giving the remaining 2 lectures as well? And perhaps we should discuss the possibility of a more permanent arrangement for the fall semester." Elena floated out of the hall on a cloud of validation. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt not just accepted, but valued, not despite her age and background, but because of the wisdom and perspective they had given her. Thomas was waiting outside, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her. "How did it go?" Elena threw her arms around him, laughing. "They want me to give more lectures, and they mentioned something about the fall semester." He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant hug, ignoring the curious glances of passing students. "I knew you'd amaze them. You're extraordinary, Eleanor Pearson." That evening, they celebrated at a small Russian restaurant Eleanor had discovered in Cambridge. Over bowls of borscht and glasses of vodka, they talked excitedly about the possibilities opening before her. "If I secure a position at the university, even as a visiting lecturer, my visa situation could be resolved." Elena marveled. "I never imagined such an opportunity." Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Elena clinked her glass against his, but a shadow crossed her face. "There's still one problem we haven't addressed." "What's that?" She gestured between them. "Us. Our age difference. People stare, Thomas. They make assumptions." It was true. Throughout their meal, Eleanor had noticed curious glances from other diners, some disapproving, others simply confused by the pairing of a woman in her 50s with a man in his early 40s. Thomas reached across the table to take her hand. "Let them stare. Their assumptions are their problem, not ours. It doesn't bother you." "The judgment?" His expression grew serious. "Elena, I spent 10 years of my life caring about what other people thought. I married Diane right out of college because everyone expected it, took a corporate job I hated because that's what successful people do, bought a house in the suburbs because that was the next step on the approved life plan." He shook his head. "And I was miserable. When Diane left me for her yoga instructor, it nearly broke me. Not because I was still in love with her, but because I'd failed at the life I thought I was supposed to have." This was the first time Thomas had spoken in detail about his former marriage. Elena listened intently, recognizing how much trust he was placing in her by sharing this vulnerability. "Working nights at the airport, living in my mother's boarding house, going back to school at 38, none of that was in the plan," he continued. "But it was honest. It was what I needed, not what others expected. And then I met you." His eyes held hers steadily. "You're not who anyone would have expected me to fall in love with. You're better. You're real. So no, Elena, I don't care if people stare or judge or assume. They don't know our story." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You've never said that before." "Said what?" "That you're in love with me." Thomas's eyes widened slightly, as if realizing the significance of his words. Then he smiled, a slow, sure smile that warmed Elena from within. "Well, I am. Completely, inconveniently, wonderfully in love with you, Elena Pearson." In that moment, surrounded by the familiar scents of her homeland's cuisine, yet firmly rooted in her new life, Elena made a decision. She was tired of letting fear, of rejection, of judgment, of an uncertain future dictate her choices. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both monumental and entirely natural. "And I think perhaps we should revisit that marriage discussion." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. "Are you proposing to me, Professor Pearson?" She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm proposing that we stop letting practical considerations or other people's expectations determine our happiness. If we want to be together, we should be together, fully, formally, and without apology." The joy that spread across Thomas's face was answer enough. 2 weeks later, on a perfect May morning, Elena Pearson became Elena Reynolds in a small ceremony at the Boston Public Garden. Margaret served as witness, alongside Dr. Foster and Mrs. Chen, who had surprised everyone by becoming Elena's staunch supporter once the relationship was out in the open. "You remind me of myself and my Herbert," the elderly woman had confided. "Everyone said I was too old for him, 5 years, but we had 30 good years together before he passed. Age is nothing compared to a good heart." Elena wore a simple cream-colored dress and carried a bouquet of blue forget-me-nots that matched her eyes. Thomas couldn't stop smiling as they exchanged vows beneath a blooming cherry tree, the pink petals occasionally drifting down around them like blessings. The ceremony was followed by lunch at Margaret's boarding house, where she had outdone herself. preparing a feast that blended American classics with Russian dishes Elena had taught her to make. As they ate and laughed and shared stories, Elena looked around at the unlikely family she had found, so different from what she had imagined when she boarded that plane from St. Petersburg, yet infinitely more precious because it had been freely chosen rather than arranged. In June, Elena received two pieces of news that completed her sense of newfound security. First, Boston University officially offered her a position as a visiting lecturer in Russian literature for the fall semester, with the possibility of extension based on student evaluations. Second, her marriage to Thomas had resolved her immigration status, granting her conditional permanent residency that would become unconditional after 2 years of marriage. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," she confessed to Thomas one evening as they sat on the small balcony of the apartment they had rented together near the university. "Last year, at this time, I was selling my possessions and preparing to marry a stranger. Now I have a husband I adore, work that fulfills me, and a future I'm excited about rather than dreading." Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Not someone else's life, your life, the one you built through courage and persistence. I'm just lucky to be part of it." In July, they received an unexpected package from Russia. One of Elena's former colleagues had been clearing out old faculty files and found a collection of poems Elena had written in her 20s. "These are too beautiful to discard," the accompanying note read. "Perhaps in America you've found the freedom to write again." Reading through her youthful verses, some naive, others surprisingly insightful, Elena felt a creative spark reignite. She began writing again, short poems at first, then essays about her experiences as an immigrant finding love and purpose in an unexpected season of life. When she shared these writings with Thomas, he encouraged her to submit them for publication. "Your story could help others who feel invisible because of their age or circumstances," he said. "You have important things to say, Elena." With his support, she sent several essays to literary magazines. To her astonishment, 3 were accepted, including one by a prestigious publication focused on immigrant experiences. The editor contacted her personally, asking if she would consider expanding her essays into a memoir. "Your voice is unique," the editor wrote. "You bridge cultures and generations in a way that feels both timeless and urgently contemporary. Readers need to hear from women who have redefined themselves after 50. As summer turned to fall, Elena found herself busier than she had been in decades, teaching at the university, writing her memoir, still helping at the bookstore 1 day a week out of loyalty to Dr. Foster. The pace was demanding but exhilarating, each day filled with purpose and connection. One evening in September, as she and Thomas walked home from a faculty reception, where she had been introduced as a valued new member of the university community, Elena's phone chimed with an incoming email. She checked it absently, then stopped walking, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief. "What is it?" Thomas asked, concerned in his voice. Elena handed him the phone, unable to find words. The email was from Richard Blackwell, the man who had abandoned her at the airport nearly a year earlier. "Elena, I hope this message finds you well. I recently saw your article in The Atlantic and was stunned to discover that the insightful writer was the same woman I so foolishly rejected. It seems you have found success despite my terrible behavior. I wonder if we might meet for coffee sometime. I find myself regretting my actions and would appreciate the opportunity to apologize in person. Sincerely, Richard." Thomas read the message twice, his expression darkening. "The audacity of this guy," he muttered, "after what he did to you." Elena gently took the phone back, a calm settling over her. "It's all right," she said, surprising herself with how truly she meant it. "His email doesn't upset me anymore. In fact, I should thank him." "Thank him?" For abandoning you in a foreign country? She smiled, slipping her hand into Thomas's. If he hadn't rejected me that night, I might never have met you. I might never have discovered my own strength or found my voice as a writer. His cruelty was actually the beginning of my freedom. As they continued walking, the evening air crisp with early autumn, Elena composed a reply in her mind. She would wish Richard well, she would acknowledge his apology, and then she would close that chapter completely, with neither bitterness nor nostalgia, simply gratitude for the unexpected path his rejection had set her upon. Because sometimes, life's worst moments, the ones that seem to break us beyond repair, are actually doorways to our greatest joys. And sometimes the love we find after 50, when our faces show the map of our journeys and our hearts carry the wisdom of our struggles, is the truest love of all, not despite our age, but because of all the living that has shaped us into who we are. For Elena Reynolds, formerly Pearson, formerly Petrova, the story that began with rejection had blossomed into something far more beautiful than she could have imagined. Not the convenient arrangement she had sought with a stranger, but a genuine connection with a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. As they reached their apartment building, Thomas pulled her into a spontaneous embrace beneath the glow of a street lamp. "Happy almost anniversary," he murmured against her hair. "Anniversary. 1 year ago tomorrow you arrived at Logan Airport, the night the universe conspired to bring you into my life." Elena laughed softly, marveling at how a date that had once represented her deepest humiliation had transformed into something worth celebrating. "Should we mark the occasion?" "Absolutely," Thomas replied with a grin. "I was thinking about dinner at that Russian place you love, followed by a surprise I've been planning." Elena raised an eyebrow. "What kind of surprise?" "If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, Professor." He kissed her forehead. "But I think you'll like it. It involves a certain literary agent who's very interested in your memoir, and possibly a small advance to allow you to focus on your writing full-time." Elena's eyes widened. "Thomas, you didn't—" "I just made the introduction," he said quickly. "Your talent did the rest. The agent read your published essays and requested the first 3 chapters of your memoir. She called me yesterday. She wants to meet you." Overwhelmed with emotion, Elena stood on tiptoe to kiss him properly, not caring who might see. This man who had found her at her lowest moment and recognized her worth when she herself had forgotten. This man who continually pushed her toward her potential rather than trying to confine her to his expectations. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "More than I have words for, in English or Russian." Thomas smiled, his eyes reflecting all the certainty she had ever longed for. "Then it's a good thing we have a lifetime for you to find those words." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, hand in hand, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here, from a desperate woman seeking security through a mail-order bride arrangement to a respected lecturer and emerging writer building a life of meaning and passion. From believing her best years were behind her to discovering they had only just begun. It wasn't the ending she had planned when she boarded that plane in St. Petersburg. It was infinitely better. An ending that was actually a beginning, written not by circumstance or convention, but by courage, connection, and the remarkable capacity of the human heart to find love in the most unexpected places. The literary agent, Samantha Graves, was not what Elena had expected. Instead of the stern, polished Manhattan professional she had imagined, Samantha was a vibrant woman in her 60s with a shock of silver-purple hair and an infectious laugh. Over lunch at an upscale Boston restaurant, she spoke frankly about Elena's memoir draft. "Your story has universal elements that will resonate with readers everywhere." Samantha explained, gesturing enthusiastically with hands adorned with artistic silver rings. The courage to start over, the experience of being dismissed because of age, finding unexpected love. These are themes that cross cultural boundaries. Elena sipped her water, still struggling to believe this conversation was real. Do you really think American readers will care about a Russian woman's journey? Absolutely, but we need to dig deeper in certain places. Samantha pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through notes. The sections about your childhood during the last years of the Soviet Union are fascinating. Most Americans have no idea what daily life was like then, and your description of being gradually aged out of opportunities in Russia is heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Thomas, who had joined them for lunch at Samantha's insistence, smiled encouragingly. At Elena, I told you people would connect with your experiences. Samantha nodded in agreement. 3 publishers are already interested based on the proposal and sample chapters. I believe we can secure a deal within a month, maybe sooner. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass. This is happening so quickly. A year ago, I was selling my possessions in St. Petersburg, and now you're about to become a published author. Samantha finished for her. Life has fascinating twists, doesn't it? That's why your story will resonate. It reminds readers that it's never too late for a new chapter. True to Samantha's prediction, by late October, Elena had signed a contract with a respected publisher known for thoughtful memoirs. The advance wasn't enormous by industry standards, but it was enough to allow her to reduce her teaching load to part-time, giving her more hours to devote to writing. I keep expecting to wake up, Elena confessed to Thomas as they celebrated with champagne in their apartment after signing the contract. To find myself back in my old life, alone in my small apartment in Russia. Thomas pulled her close on the sofa, his warmth a constant reassurance. This is real, Elena. You earned this through your talent and perseverance. She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave. We earned it. Without you, I would still be a frightened woman in an airport terminal. Or worse, trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who couldn't see past my wrinkles. You would have found your way, Thomas insisted. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Perhaps he was right, Elena mused. Perhaps she would have eventually found her footing alone. But she was profoundly grateful she hadn't needed. To as autumn painted New England in brilliant hues of red and gold, Elena divided her time between teaching, writing, and building a life with Thomas. They established routines and traditions that reflected their blended backgrounds. Sunday brunches with Margaret, Friday movie nights at home, monthly visits to the Russian restaurant in Cambridge, where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. Elena's university lectures became increasingly popular, with students from other departments sitting in to hear her unique perspective on Russian literature and culture. The department chair hinted that a more permanent position might be possible for the following academic year, assuming her student evaluations remained strong. But amid this professional success, Elena found herself facing a new and unexpected challenge: the physical manifestations of aging. It began with persistent pain in her right knee, a nagging discomfort that she initially dismissed as the result of Boston's uneven sidewalks. When walking became difficult enough to affect her daily activities, Thomas insisted she see a doctor. It's just wear and tear, she protested, a normal part of getting older. That doesn't mean you have to suffer through it, he countered. This is America, land of replacement parts. The diagnosis was straightforward: osteoarthritis, moderate to severe. The orthopedic specialist recommended physical therapy, anti-inflammatory medications, and potentially surgery if conservative treatments didn't provide sufficient relief. For Elena, the diagnosis triggered a complex emotional response. In Russia, She had accepted physical decline as an inevitable part of aging, something to be endured rather than treated. The American approach, aggressive intervention, an assumption that quality of life should be maintained regardless of age, was both appealing and somehow unsettling. "You don't understand," she tried to explain to Thomas after the appointment. "In my culture, in my generation, we don't expect to feel young forever. We accept limitations as they come." Thomas listened carefully, as he always did when their cultural differences emerged. "I understand accepting reality," he said after she had finished, "but there's a difference between acceptance and resignation. If treatment can improve your quality of life, why not pursue it?" "Because it feels indulgent," Eleanor admitted. "Like I'm demanding special accommodation for a natural process." "Elena." Thomas took her hands, his expression earnest. "Getting proper medical care isn't indulgent. It's self-respect." The conversation touched on deeper insecurities that Elena had carried into their relationship. The fear that her aging body would eventually become a burden, that Thomas would regret tying himself to a woman who was moving into her senior years, while he was still in his prime. These fears intensified when she overheard a conversation between two younger faculty members in the university break room. They hadn't noticed her entrance, absorbed in their gossip. "Married her right after she got here. Has to be a green card thing," one was saying. "I don't know," the other replied. "They seem genuinely into each other. It's kind of sweet in a weird way." "Sweet. She's old enough to be his mother." "Not quite. And he's not exactly a kid. He's in his 40s. Still, can you imagine? The physical side must be—" Eleanor had cleared her throat then, causing both women to turn with mortified expressions. She had managed a cool smile, filled her coffee mug, and left with her dignity intact, but their words lodged in her heart like splinters. That evening, she found herself studying her naked body in the bathroom mirror with critical eyes. The softness around her middle, the slight sag of her breasts, the texture of her skin that no amount of expensive cream could restore to its youthful elasticity. Thomas had never expressed anything but desire and appreciation for her body, but the seeds of doubt, once planted, grew quickly in the fertile soil of her insecurities. She began wearing more conservative nightclothes, making excuses to avoid intimacy, shrinking from his touch in ways that couldn't go unnoticed. Finally, after a week of this subtle withdrawal, Thomas confronted her. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked as they prepared for bed, his voice carefully neutral. "You've been distant." Elena busied herself with folding laundry, avoiding his eyes. "I'm just tired. The book deadline, the classes—" "Elena." His gentle tone made her look up. "We promised honesty, remember? Whatever it is, we can talk about it." The tenderness in his expression broke through her defenses. With reluctance, she told him about the conversation she had overheard and the deeper fears it had awakened. Thomas listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he sat beside her on the bed, close but not touching, respecting her current need for space. "Those women don't know anything about us," he said finally. "Their opinions are worthless." "But they're not entirely wrong, are they?" Elena countered. "I am older. My body is aging. That's simply reality." "Yes, you're older than me. And yes, your body shows the signs of having lived longer than mine." "So what?" Thomas's voice was firm. "My body isn't perfect either. I have that weird appendectomy scar. My hairline is definitely receding, and according to my last physical, my cholesterol is concerning." Despite herself, Elena smiled slightly at his matter-of-fact assessment. "The difference," Thomas continued, "is that men aren't taught to hate these changes the way women are. We're allowed to age without diminishing our perceived value." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wanted, and took her hand. "I love your body because it's yours, because it holds the woman I adore. The lines on your face, the silver in your hair, they're evidence of the life you've lived, the wisdom you've earned. They're beautiful to me. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes. I worry that one day you'll look at me and see only an old woman, that you'll regret choosing me. Thomas's expression softened with understanding. Elena, love isn't static. It grows and changes as we do. When we're 80 and 90, God willing, we'll both look different than we do now, but we'll still be us. I didn't fall in love with a snapshot of you frozen in time. I fell in love with a living, changing, growing person. His words were beautiful, and Elena wanted desperately to believe them. But decades of cultural messaging about women's diminishing value with age couldn't be erased by one heartfelt conversation. "I'll try to remember that," she said, squeezing his hand. Thomas recognized the lingering doubt in her eyes. "Maybe this is something we need to work on together. Would you consider talking to someone professional about it? These feelings are completely valid, but they're causing you pain, and I hate seeing you hurt." The suggestion of therapy was another cultural divide to navigate. In Russia, especially among her generation, psychological counseling carried a stigma. Problems were handled privately, within the family. But Elena had come to appreciate many aspects of American directness about mental health. "Perhaps," she conceded, "I will think about it." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Elena made a conscious decision to lower her defenses, allowing Thomas to hold her close. It was a small step, but an important one, choosing trust over fear, intimacy over isolation. In November, as her physical therapy for her knee began showing promising results, Elena found a therapist who specialized in immigrant experiences and women's issues related to aging. Dr. Miriam Klein was in her late 60s, a Jewish woman whose parents had fled Europe during World War II, giving her a unique understanding of displacement and cultural adaptation. "Many of my clients are women struggling with aging in a youth-obsessed culture," Dr. Klein explained in their first session. "But immigrants face additional layers of complexity. The cultural messages about aging often differ dramatically between societies." Over several weeks, Elena began unpacking her complicated feelings about aging, desirability, and self-worth. Dr. Klein didn't offer simple reassurances or dismissive platitudes. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that helped Elena recognize patterns in her thinking, some dating back to childhood observations of how older women were treated in Soviet society. "You've internalized certain beliefs about what an older woman can expect or deserve," Dr. Klein observed. "Where do you think those beliefs originated?" Elena considered this. "My mother was widowed at 48. I remember how people treated her with respect for her grief, yes, but also as if her life as a woman was essentially over. No one expected her to find love again, to have desires or dreams beyond raising me and eventually helping with grandchildren." And did she accept that role? Completely. She never dated, never expressed interest in another relationship. She focused entirely on me and her work as a school librarian. Elena paused, a new insight forming. "I always saw her acceptance as dignified, even noble. But now I wonder if she was lonely, if she silenced parts of herself to meet expectations." These sessions created ripples that extended beyond Elena's relationship with Thomas. As she worked on her memoir, she began revisiting childhood memories with fresh perspective, recognizing how early she had absorbed limiting beliefs about women's value and purpose. These insights enriched her writing, adding layers of complexity to what might otherwise have been a simpler narrative of cultural displacement and unexpected love. Samantha, her literary agent, was thrilled with the evolving manuscript. "This is exactly what I was hoping for," a personal story that illuminates universal themes. You're not just telling readers what happened, you're revealing how experiences shape beliefs and how beliefs can be questioned and changed. By December, several positive developments converged to boost Elena's confidence. Her knee pain had decreased significantly through consistent physical therapy. Her university department had officially offered her a tenure-track position for the following academic year, impressed by her exceptional student evaluations and growing reputation. And her memoir, now titled Arrival Finding Home After 50, had received an enthusiastic response from her editor. But perhaps the most meaningful growth was happening in her relationship with Thomas. As Elena became more open about her insecurities, Thomas responded with patience and understanding, never dismissing her feelings but consistently challenging the negative beliefs underlying them. They developed a playful code phrase, "That's the Soviet librarian talking," to identify when Elena was slipping into self-limiting patterns of thought inherited from her upbringing. Their first Christmas together became an opportunity to blend traditions. Thomas had grown up with typical American Christmas celebrations, a decorated tree, presents on Christmas morning, elaborate family meals. Elena's holiday experiences were different. In post-Soviet Russia, New Year's Eve was the primary celebration, with Father Frost bringing gifts and families gathering for feasts that stretched past midnight. They decided to honor both traditions, decorating a tree with a mix of American ornaments and Russian folk art figurines Elena found at a specialty shop. They planned a Christmas Day gathering with Margaret and several faculty friends, followed by a Russian-style New Year's celebration with zakouski appetizers and champagne at midnight. As they shopped for decorations at a holiday market, Elena found herself drawn to a hand-painted ornament depicting an elderly couple sitting on a park bench, their silver heads leaning together. "It's sweet," Thomas commented, watching her examine it. "Reminds me of that older couple we always see walking in the park near campus." Eleanor nodded, struck by the artist's depiction of age as something gentle and companionable rather than tragic. "I'd like to imagine us this way someday," she said softly. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We will be, except I'll have less hair and you'll still be correcting my Russian pronunciation." Elena laughed, tucking the ornament into their shopping basket. It would be their first Christmas keepsake together, a symbol not just of the holiday, but of a future they were both choosing to envision. As the year drew to a close, Elena received an unexpected email from her former colleague in Russia, the one who had sent her old poems months earlier. Natalia was planning a visit to New York for an academic conference in January and wondered if she might extend her trip to see Elena. "In Boston. Of course she must come," Elena told Thomas excitedly. "Natalia was my closest friend at the university. She supported me through my mother's illness and encouraged my writing when I had almost given up." The prospect of reconnecting with a piece of her former life, but from the security of her new one, filled Elena with anticipation. She spent hours planning places to show Natalia, wondering how her friend would respond to the dramatic changes in her circumstances. "Are you nervous about her visit?" Thomas asked, observing Elena's meticulous preparation of the guest room. Elena paused, considering. "A little. Natalia knew me when I was different, more resigned to limitations perhaps, less hopeful. And now I feel like I'm becoming someone new, while also reclaiming parts of myself I thought were lost." She smoothed the guest room quilt, a wedding gift from Margaret. "I want her to see that I'm happy, truly happy, not just making the best of things, as we often did in Russia." When Natalia arrived on a snowy January evening, the two women embraced with tears and laughter, slipping immediately into rapid Russian that left Thomas smiling in good-natured confusion. Natalia was a petite, energetic woman with sharp features and observant eyes that missed nothing, After the initial excitement of reunion, she studied Elena with open curiosity. "You've changed," she declared, switching to accented but fluent English for Thomas's benefit. "Not just the hair or the clothes, there's something different in your eyes, your posture." Elena exchanged a smile with Thomas. "A lot has changed." Over dinner, Elena and Natalia shared stories of mutual friends in St. Petersburg, of Natalia's ongoing struggles at the increasingly conservative university, of Elena's surprising journey from mail-order bride prospect to professor and author. Thomas listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed his genuine interest in understanding Elena's former life. Later, when Thomas excused himself to give the friends privacy, Natalia turned to Elena with raised eyebrows. "So, this is why you never answered Richard's email after he abandoned you." Elena was startled. "You know about Richard? About what happened at the airport?" Natalia nodded grimly. "He contacted me about 6 months ago, trying to find you. Claimed he had made a terrible mistake and wanted to apologize." She snorted delicately. "I told him nothing, of course, but I was worried about you until I received your message about the teaching position. Then I knew you must be all right." "More than all right," Elena confirmed, glancing toward the kitchen where Thomas was making tea. Though not in any way I could have predicted, Natalia followed her gaze, her expression softening. "He loves you very much. It's obvious in how he looks at you, how he listens when you speak." She reached across the table to squeeze Elena's hand. "I'm so happy for you, Lenochka. You deserve this happiness." Coming from Natalia, practical, unsentimental Natalia, who had lived through the same cultural conditioning about aging and women's value, these words carried special weight. If her oldest friend could see the authenticity in her relationship with Thomas, perhaps Elena could finally silence her own lingering doubts. As they prepared for bed that night, Elena shared this thought with Thomas. "Natalia's approval means a great deal to me," she admitted. "She knows me, the real me, not just who I've become here." Thomas kissed her forehead tenderly. "The real. You isn't fixed in the past, Elena. We're all constantly evolving. The woman you were in Russia, the woman who arrived at Logan Airport, the professor who captivates her students, the author finishing her memoir, they're all authentically you." Elena considered this idea, finding comfort in its expansiveness. Perhaps identity wasn't something static to be preserved or recovered, but a continuing process of becoming. And perhaps the greatest gift Thomas had given her wasn't love or security, but the space and support to discover who she could be when freed from limiting expectations. The next morning, Elena woke early and found Natalia already in the kitchen, cradling a mug of tea as she looked out at the snow-covered street. "I couldn't sleep," Natalia explained. "The time difference." She hesitated, then added, "And I've been thinking about what you told me last night, about finding yourself here, about feeling seen in a way you never did in Russia." Elena nodded, waiting for her friend to continue. "I've been offered a visiting position at the University of Michigan for next year," Natalia said suddenly. "I was planning to decline. Moving to America at 58 seemed frightening. Starting over, learning new systems, being surrounded by younger colleagues. But seeing you—" She gestured around the apartment at the life Elena had built. "Perhaps it's not too late for me either." Elena felt a surge of emotion, joy for her friend, pride in providing inspiration, and profound gratitude for the unexpected ways life continued to unfold. "It's never too late, Natasha," she said firmly. "Never." As January gave way to February, Elena completed the final revisions on her memoir. The publication date was set for early summer, with a book tour to follow. Her editor had already arranged speaking engagements at several universities and cultural centers, focusing on themes of cross-cultural adaptation and reinvention after 50. Your story challenges so many assumptions, the editor explained during the final review call, about aging, about immigration, about what makes a meaningful life. Readers will find themselves questioning their own limiting beliefs. Elena hoped this was true. If her journey could inspire others, especially women approaching or past 50, to recognize their continuing capacity for growth, love, and meaningful contribution, then the pain and uncertainty she had experienced would serve a greater purpose. One evening in late February, as Elena and Thomas celebrated the completion of her manuscript with a quiet dinner at home, Thomas surprised her with a small velvet box. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, puzzled. "It's not my birthday or our anniversary." "Open it," he encouraged, an expectant smile playing at his lips. Inside was a delicate silver charm bracelet with 2 pendants, a miniature book and a tiny airport control tower. "I thought we could add to it over time," Thomas explained as he fastened it around her wrist, "to mark the significant moments in our journey together. The book for your memoir, the tower for where we met." Elena touched the charms gently, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift and its symbolic meaning. "Our journey is just beginning," she said. Thomas nodded, his eyes warm with promise. "That's exactly what I was thinking." As winter gradually yielded to spring, Elena found herself reflecting on the extraordinary transformations of the past year and a half, from the desperate woman sitting alone in an airport terminal, heartbroken and terrified, to a woman standing firmly in her purpose and power, loved for exactly who she was. Wrinkles, wisdom, and all. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of profound doubt, cultural misunderstandings to navigate, health challenges to address, and the ongoing process of integrating her Russian past with her American present. But each obstacle had ultimately strengthened her, and strengthened her relationship with Thomas. On the anniversary of their wedding, they returned to the Boston Public Garden, where they had exchanged vows. The cherry trees were again in bloom, their delicate pink petals drifting on the spring breeze like nature's confetti. "Any regrets?" Thomas asked, as they stood beneath their special tree, his arm around her waist. Elena considered the question, seriously, then shook her head. "Not about us. Never about us." "What about the rest? Coming to America, the way it happened?" "Even that," Elena said with certainty. "If Richard had been waiting at the airport as promised, if he had been the man I imagined him to be during those years of correspondence, I would have missed. Everything is important. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the doorway to the best." Thomas tightened his arm around her. "I'm grateful every day that you walked through that doorway." Elena smiled up at him. This man who had first seen her at her most vulnerable and had recognized not weakness but courage, not age but wisdom, not an ending but a beginning. "The best part," she said softly, "is that we're still walking through it together." As they strolled through the garden, cherry blossoms swirling around them like wishes made visible, Elena thought about the final lines of her memoir, words that had come to her in the quiet darkness just before dawn, capturing the essence of all she had learned. Age is not the diminishing of possibility, but its refinement. The lines on our faces are not markers of decline, but evidence of lives fully inhabited. And love, real love, sees beyond the shallow. Metrics of years and appearance to the essential self. The soul that remains ever young, ever capable of growth, ever ready for a new chapter to begin. For Elena Reynolds, that new chapter was unfolding day by day, rich with purpose and connection, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin precisely when we least expect them, not in youth with its dazzling potential, but in maturity, with its hard-won wisdom and deeper capacity for authentic joy. Summer in Boston brought warm breezes, outdoor concerts in the parks, and the official publication of Elena's memoir. The day her author copies arrived, a box of hardcovers with her name embossed in elegant silver lettering on the spine, Eleanor stood in their apartment holding a book in trembling hands, scarcely able to believe it was real. "Should I pinch you?" Thomas teased, watching her with undisguised pride. "It might help," Elena murmured, tracing her finger over the cover image. A black and white photograph of a woman seen from behind, standing at an airport window, looking out at planes taking off into a vast sky. Simple, evocative, perfect. Opening to the dedication page, she read the words she had labored over, wanting to get them exactly right. For Thomas, who saw me when I was invisible. For Margaret, who offered shelter that became home. And for all, women over 50 who still have chapters to write. The initial reviews exceeded even Samantha's optimistic predictions. The New York Times book review called Elena's memoir a luminous exploration of identity, belonging, and the courage to begin again at any age. NPR featured an interview with her about the immigrant experience and perceptions of aging across cultures. Bookstores began reporting strong sales, and Samantha called with news that a prominent women's magazine wanted to feature Elena in an article about reinvention after 50. "They want to do a photo shoot next week," Samantha explained. "Their angle is beauty and wisdom at any age, or something like that." Elena felt immediate resistance. "A photo shoot? Me? Samantha, I'm a writer, not a model." "That's exactly the point," her agent countered. "You're a real woman with a powerful story. Readers want to see the person behind the words." When Elena expressed her hesitation to Thomas that evening, he listened carefully to her concerns. "What's the real worry here?" he asked gently. "That you won't photograph well? Or that being visible in that way makes you vulnerable?" Elena considered his question, appreciating how he always encouraged her to examine her deeper motivations. "Both, perhaps. And there's something else." She hesitated. "The memoir reveals so much about my journey, including the mail-order bride aspect. I worry about judgment." Thomas nodded in understanding. "That's valid. But remember, you wrote this book to challenge assumptions about age, cultural differences, and what women are capable of. Being photographed, as you are, not airbrushed, into someone else's idea of perfection, is consistent with that message." After further reflection, Elena agreed to the photo shoot, with conditions. No excessive makeup, no digital alteration of her appearance, no styling that didn't reflect her authentic self. To her surprise, the magazine's creative team was enthusiastic about this approach, explaining that their readers were hungry for genuine representation of women in their 50s and beyond. The resulting photographs captured Elena in various settings that reflected her journey: in front of a classroom, at her writing desk, in the Boston Public Garden where she and Thomas had married, and even at Logan Airport, the site of her devastating arrival and fateful meeting with Thomas. In each image, she appeared as herself, a woman of 51 with silver-streaked hair, laugh lines around her eyes, and a gaze that communicated both vulnerability and strength. When the magazine hit newsstands in July, Eleanor was unprepared for the response. Women began approaching her in cafes, in bookstores, even on the street, to thank her for her honesty about aging, about cultural adjustment, about finding love in unexpected circumstances. "I left my home country 20 years ago and still feel caught between worlds," one woman told her, clutching Eleanor's book after a reading at a local library. "Your words gave me permission to honor both parts of myself. My husband died last year, and at 62, I thought romance was over for me," another confided. "Your story reminded me that the heart doesn't stop beating just because the calendar pages turn." These interactions touched Elena deeply, affirming that her personal journey held meaning beyond her own experience. As her summer book tour expanded to include more cities, she began collecting these stories, listening with genuine interest to women who saw themselves reflected in various aspects of her narrative. In August, Elena received an invitation that left her momentarily speechless. The Russian consulate in Boston wanted her to speak at a cultural exchange event focused on contemporary Russian-American literature. "They mentioned your memoir specifically," the consulate representative explained, over the phone, as an example of cross-cultural dialogue that builds understanding between our countries. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. She had left Russia feeling invisible and undervalued, only to be recognized by representatives of her homeland now that she had found success in America. Her initial impulse was to decline, to protect herself from potential criticism or dismissal. When she shared the invitation with Thomas, however, his perspective helped her reconsider. "Maybe this isn't just about you," he suggested. "Maybe your story could help other Russian women see possibilities they hadn't imagined." This reframing resonated with Eleanor. Throughout her journey, others had helped her see beyond her limitations. Thomas, Margaret, Dr. Foster, Samantha. Perhaps this was an opportunity to extend that gift to women still living within the constraints she had escaped. She accepted the invitation, spending weeks preparing remarks that would be diplomatic yet honest, respectful of her heritage while acknowledging the cultural attitudes about women's aging that had driven her departure. The evening of the event, she wore a dress that blended American simplicity with Russian elegance. A deep burgundy sheath with a hand-embroidered shawl she had brought from St. Petersburg, one of the few treasured items in her single suitcase. Thomas accompanied her, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit. As they entered the ornate consulate building, Elena felt a momentary disorientation, the architecture, the language being spoken around her. Even the familiar sense of Russian cuisine being served at the reception carried her back to her former life. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked quietly. Noticing her slight hesitation, Elena squeezed his hand. "Yes, just experiencing a strange collision of worlds." The consulate event drew an eclectic audience: Russian expatriates, American academics specializing in Slavic studies, diplomatic personnel, and literature enthusiasts. When Elena took the podium, she began by speaking in Russian, welcoming her compatriots before switching to English for the main portion of her address. "Identity is not a fixed point, but a continuing conversation," she told the audience. "As immigrants, we exist in the productive tension between what we have carried with us and what we have discovered in our new homes. My story is not about rejecting Russia, but about finding a place where I could fully express all aspects of myself, including those that had no room to flourish in the culture of my birth." The response was overwhelmingly positive, with attendees from both countries expressing appreciation for her nuanced perspective. Most gratifying were the Russian women who approached her afterward, some near her age, others much younger, seeking advice about their own cross-cultural journeys. One elegant woman in her 60s, introduced as a former prima ballerina with the Mariinsky Ballet, took Elena's hands in hers and spoke rapidly in Russian. "You have said what many of us feel but have not had words for," she declared. "The divided heart of the immigrant woman, especially those of us who left later in life." As the evening concluded, the cultural attaché from the consulate presented Elena with a surprising offer. Would she consider serving as a cultural ambassador for a series of educational exchanges between Boston and St. Petersburg universities? "We need authentic voices who understand both worlds," the attaché explained. "Your background in literature and education, combined with your personal experience, makes you uniquely qualified." Elena promised to consider the proposal, her mind already exploring the possibilities. She had never imagined returning to Russia, even for a visit, but the prospect of helping build bridges between her two homes held undeniable appeal. On the taxi ride back to their apartment, she and Thomas discussed the opportunity. It would mean occasional travel to St. Petersburg, she mused, perhaps for a week or two at a time. I could come with you, at least for the first visit, Thomas suggested. I'd love to see where you grew up, to understand that part of your life more fully. The thought of showing Thomas her childhood neighborhood, the university where she had taught, the small cafes where she had graded papers on winter afternoons, it created an unexpected sense of completion, as if a circle might be closed. I would like that, she said softly, to share my first home with you. In September, as the new academic year began, Elena's professional life evolved in exciting ways. Her department chair approached her with a unique proposition. Would she be interested in developing a new course specifically addressing the intersection of literature, immigration, and identity? The course would be cross-listed between the Russian Studies and American Studies departments, reflecting Elena's dual expertise. Your memoir has created significant interest among students, the chair explained. We've had requests for coursework that explores themes similar to those you address in your writing. Elena embraced the challenge enthusiastically, designing a syllabus that incorporated works from Russian, American, and other immigrant authors who had written about cultural displacement, belonging, and reinvention. She included texts she had studied as a student in St. Petersburg, alongside contemporary American voices, creating conversations across time and geography. The course filled immediately during registration, with a diverse group of students representing various majors and backgrounds. Elena's teaching style, combining academic rigor with personal insight, created a classroom atmosphere where students felt comfortable sharing their own experiences of cultural adaptation or identity formation. One undergraduate, a young woman, named Sophia, whose parents had immigrated from Greece, stayed after class one October afternoon. Professor Reynolds, she began hesitantly, your discussions about cultural expectations for women really resonate with me. My family is very traditional, and they expect me to prioritize marriage over my career ambitions. Elena recognized the conflict in the young woman's eyes, the desire to honor family traditions while creating a life authentic to her own values and aspirations. Cultural expectations are powerful, she acknowledged, but they don't have to be prison walls. They can be starting points for creating your own synthesis. These mentoring conversations became a regular part of Elena's academic life, with students seeking her guidance not just on literary analysis, but on navigating the complex terrain of cross-cultural identity. She found profound fulfillment in these interactions, seeing in her students' journeys echoes of her own struggles and triumphs. Thomas, meanwhile, had completed his engineering degree and accepted a position with a sustainable energy firm developing offshore wind technology. The work combined his technical skills with his growing environmental concerns, and he often came home excited about innovations that could help address climate change. I never imagined I'd start a new career at 43, he remarked one evening as they prepared dinner together, a domestic ritual they both cherished. Everyone told me I was crazy to leave my stable accounting job. Elena smiled as she chopped vegetables for a borscht recipe she'd been teaching him. We're both late bloomers, it seems. Not late, Thomas corrected, stirring the pot of simmering broth. Right on time for who we're becoming. As autumn progressed, Elena and Thomas began discussing a significant life change, buying a home together. The apartment they had shared since their marriage, while comfortable, felt increasingly like a transitional space rather than a permanent home. They found themselves dreaming of a garden where Elena could grow the herbs and vegetables she remembered from her mother's kitchen, an office where Thomas could work on engineering projects, and perhaps most importantly, space for visitors from both their expanding worlds Natalia will need a proper guest room when she visits from Michigan, Eleanor pointed out, referencing her friend who had indeed accepted the visiting professorship and was thriving in her new American academic environment. And, "My sister's kids would love a yard to play in when they come from California," Thomas added. His relationship with his younger sister had strengthened since he and Elena married, with regular video calls and plans for a family visit during the upcoming holidays. They began house hunting in October, focusing on neighborhoods with good public transportation access for both their commutes. The process became an exercise in blending their aesthetic preferences and practical needs. Thomas valued modern energy efficiency. Elena was drawn to historical character and architectural details that reminded her of St. Petersburg's elegant buildings. After viewing numerous properties, they discovered a Victorian-era home in a diverse neighborhood that balanced their priorities. The house needed some updating but had good bones, beautiful woodwork, and a surprisingly large garden for an urban property. Most compelling was a sunroom with floor-to-ceiling windows where light poured in even on cloudy days. "I could write here," Elena said softly, standing in the center of the space, imagining her desk positioned to catch the morning light. Thomas, watching her expression, knew they had found their home. The purchase process was complex, involving mortgage applications that required explanation of Elena's unconventional employment history and immigration journey. But by early December, they received the keys to their new home, planning to gradually renovate before moving in completely. As they celebrated this milestone with Margaret, who had brought a traditional American housewarming gift of bread and salt, so you'll never know hunger, Elena reflected on the distance she had traveled, not just geographically but emotionally and spiritually, since that night at Logan Airport. "When I arrived with one suitcase and a broken heart, I never imagined," she began, then paused, overcome with emotion. Margaret patted her hand with characteristic briskness that couldn't quite hide her affection. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. My Henry always said the best adventures begin with a good catastrophe." This perspective, seeing her abandonment by Richard not as an ending, but as the necessary beginning of a more authentic journey, had become central to Elena's understanding of her own story. She had incorporated this philosophy into her lectures, her writing, and her personal outlook, finding that it resonated deeply with others who had experienced painful transitions. In January, an unexpected email arrived from Richard Blackwell. Elena hadn't heard from him since his attempt to reconnect the previous year, which she had ignored. This new message had a different tone, more reflective, less presumptuous. "Elena, I recently read your memoir and was deeply moved by your journey. I appear in your story as the villain, and I cannot dispute the accuracy of your portrayal. My behavior was inexcusable. While I don't expect or deserve forgiveness, I wanted you to know that your book has forced me to confront my superficiality and prejudices about aging. You've become the accomplished, respected person you always were beneath the surface, while I remain trapped in patterns of evaluation that have left me perpetually dissatisfied. I wish you continued success and happiness. With Thomas, you deserve every bit of it. Sincerely, Richard." Elena read the message twice, surprised by its apparent sincerity. She forwarded it to Thomas with a simple question. "Your thoughts?" His reply came quickly. "Seems genuine. People can change. The question is whether responding serves any purpose for you." Eleanor considered this carefully. Her immediate reaction was to delete the email and move on, as she had with Richard's previous attempt at contact. She had no desire to resume any form of relationship with the man who had caused her such pain. Yet something about the message's humility gave her pause. That evening, she discussed it with Thomas over dinner in their partially renovated kitchen. "Part of me thinks responding would be reopening a door better left closed," she explained. "But another part wonders if a brief acknowledgement might provide closure for both of us." Thomas considered her words thoughtfully. "What would you want to say?" Elena reflected on this question. "Nothing dramatic. Perhaps just that I appreciate his recognition of what happened, and that, ironically, his rejection set me on a path to genuine happiness." "That sounds like closure without compromise," Thomas observed, "but only do it if it feels right to you, not out of any obligation to him." After further reflection, Elena composed a brief, dignified response. She confirmed receipt of Richard's message, acknowledged its apparently sincere tone, and expressed hope that he would find fulfillment in his own future. She neither offered forgiveness nor expressed continued resentment, simply recognition of a chapter closed. "The experiences we survive often become our greatest teachers," she concluded. "I hope we have both learned and grown from ours." Sending. The message brought an unexpected sense of liberation, as if she had set down a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Richard Blackwell no longer held any power over her self-perception or happiness. He had become simply a character in her story, important to the plot, but not to the resolution. As winter gradually softened into spring, Elena and Thomas settled into their new home, establishing routines and traditions that reflected their blended identities. The garden became Elena's domain, where she planted herbs from seeds her friend Natalia had sent from Russia. Dill, parsley, and borage with its cucumber-scented blue flowers. Thomas focused on renovating the sunroom, installing energy-efficient windows and a sustainable heating system that would allow Eleanor to use the space year-round for her writing. Throughout these months, Elena continued developing her cultural ambassador role, helping coordinate virtual exchanges between students in Boston and St. Petersburg. These connections proved especially meaningful as political tensions between the United States and Russia intensified, providing young people on both sides with personal relationships that transcended geopolitics. In April, Elena and Thomas finalized plans for their first visit to Russia together. The trip would combine professional obligations. Elena would give lectures at her former university and meet with potential exchange partners, with personal elements, including visits to her mother's grave and her childhood neighborhood. "Are you nervous?" Thomas asked as they reviewed their itinerary one evening. Elena considered the question carefully. "Not nervous, exactly, but I expect it will be emotional. Returning as a different person than the one who left. Seeing familiar places through new eyes." The visit, scheduled for early June, coincided with St. Petersburg's famous White Nights, when the northern city experienced nearly round-the-clock daylight. Elena was eager for Thomas to experience this magical time, when the city's residents strolled along the Neva River at midnight, under a sky that never fully darkened, and cultural life extended into the early morning hours. As their departure date approached, Elena found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point, able to return to her homeland not as a failed mail-order bride crawling back in defeat, but as a successful author, professor, and cultural ambassador, accompanied by a husband who had chosen her for exactly who she was. The circle was completing itself, not in the way she had imagined when she boarded that plane to Boston nearly 3 years earlier, but in a way that honored both her past and her present. She was neither fully Russian nor fully American, but something more complex and interesting. A woman who had found the courage to begin again at 50 and discovered that age was not an ending, but a vantage point from which to view life's continuing possibilities. On the evening before their departure, Elena and Thomas sat in their garden as twilight descended, the scent of Elena's herbs filling the air with memories of her Russian childhood, blended with the promise of American summers too. "Come. Ready for tomorrow?" Thomas asked, reaching for her hand across the small table where they had just shared a light dinner. Elena nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace, ready for tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. As night settled around them, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, Elena thought about the words she had recently added to the afterword for the paperback edition of her memoir. The journey of the immigrant is often described as leaving behind, a cutting off. But I have found it to be more like grafting, the careful joining of two living things that, properly tended, create something stronger and more fruitful than either could have been alone. My Russian roots now draw nourishment from American soil. My American branches reach toward a Russian sky, and in this dual existence I have found not division, but multiplication, of perspective, of possibility, of love. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, as if sensing the depth of her reflections. No words were necessary between them now. They had built a language of their own, bridging cultures and expectations, creating a shared story that continued to unfold. With each passing day, for Eleanor, the girl from St. Petersburg who had become a woman of Boston, the most profound discovery had been that love, real love, saw not the surface markers of age or nationality or circumstance, but the essential self that remained ever capable of growth, change, and new beginnings. Thomas had given her this gift first, seeing her soul when others saw only her age. But ultimately, Elena had given this gift to herself, finding the courage to believe she deserved such recognition and to build a life that honored her full humanity. As they sat together in the garden they had created, Elena knew with absolute certainty that the happiest chapters of her story were still being written, not despite her age, but because of all the wisdom, resilience, and self-knowledge those years had granted her. The mail-order bride, rejected for being too old, had found something far more valuable than the security she had originally sought. She had found a love that recognized her true worth, a purpose that valued her accumulated wisdom, and most importantly, the courage to embrace life's continuing possibilities, regardless of what page of the calendar she had reached. The flight to St. Petersburg carried Eleanor across time zones and memories. Seated by the window with Thomas beside her, she watched the familiar landscape of her homeland emerge from beneath the clouds, the glittering waters of the Gulf of Finland, the sprawling cityscape with its distinctive architecture, the network of canals that had earned St. Petersburg its nickname as the Venice of the North. "It's beautiful," Thomas murmured, leaning over to share her view. "Different from what I imagined somehow." Elena nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "More European than most American images of Russia. Peter the Great wanted a city that would rival Paris and Vienna." As they descended, Elena's pulse quickened. How would it feel to walk these streets again, not as a resident growing increasingly invisible with age, but as a visitor who had found unexpected recognition abroad? Would familiar places feel smaller, as childhood homes often do when revisited by adults? Or would they still hold the power to transport her back to earlier versions of herself? The answers began unfolding immediately. The airport, renovated since her departure, felt both familiar and strange. The cadence of Russian voices surrounding her created an immediate sense of homecoming, yet she found herself mentally translating into English, a habit developed from her American life. Their hotel, a carefully restored pre-revolutionary building near the Hermitage Museum, offered a blend of historical character and modern convenience that bridged Elena's two worlds. From their window, the golden dome of St. Isaac's Cathedral gleamed in the perpetual twilight of the white nights, a sight that had once been part of her daily landscape. "I can't believe this light," Thomas said as they unpacked, glancing repeatedly toward the window. "It's 10 p.m., but it looks like early evening," Elena smiled, pleased by his fascination. Wait until midnight, when people are still strolling along Nevsky Prospect without flashlights. It's why everyone in St. Petersburg goes slightly mad with joy during this season, after the long, dark winter. Their first full day was dedicated to personal reconnection rather than professional obligations. Elena led Thomas through her former neighborhood, pointing out the apartment building where she had lived until her departure, the small bakery where she had bought bread each morning, the tree-lined path where she had walked to clear her head during difficult times. "That's where I made the decision," she said quietly, pausing beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking one of the city's countless canals. "What decision?" Thomas asked, taking her hand. "To become a mail-order bride, to leave everything familiar, for the slim chance of a better life." She gazed at the bench, remembering the desperation that had driven her choice. "I sat there for hours, weighing what little I had against what I might gain." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Would you make the same choice again, knowing everything that followed?" Eleanor considered this thoughtfully. "Yes," she said finally. "Even with the humiliation at the airport, even with the fear and uncertainty, it was the doorway to finding myself. And you." They continued their exploration, stopping for lunch at a small cafe that Elena had frequented as a university instructor. To her surprise, the owner, a robust woman with hennaed hair, recognized her immediately. "Elenochka Petrova," she exclaimed, using the diminutive form of Eleanor's birth name with the traditional Russian patronymic. "Is it really you? We read about your book in the cultural newspaper." Eleanor found herself enveloped in a crushing embrace, then peppered with questions about America, her writing, her new life. When she introduced Thomas as her husband, the cafe owner assessed him with unabashed curiosity. "A younger man, and an American too. You always were full of surprises, Elenochka." She turned to Thomas with a conspiratorial wink. "You found yourself a treasure. Russian women are the strongest in the world. They bend but never break." Thomas smiled, his limited Russian sufficient to grasp her meaning. "Ya znаю," he replied carefully. "I know." Word of Elena's return spread quickly through her former circles. By evening, her phone was filled with messages from old colleagues and friends eager to reconnect. The most significant came from Irina Volkova, the department chair who had gradually reduced Elena's teaching hours in favor of younger instructors during her final years at the university. "I understand you're giving a guest lecture," Irina wrote. "Perhaps we could meet beforehand. There are matters I'd like to discuss." Elena showed the message to Thomas with raised eyebrows. "This is unexpected. Irina was instrumental in my professional diminishment. I'm not sure what she wants now." "Maybe your success abroad has caused some reconsideration," Thomas suggested. "Or perhaps the university is interested in strengthening international connections." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, though skepticism colored her tone. "I'll meet with her, but with appropriate caution." The following day brought Elena's first professional engagement, a lecture at her former university on contemporary American perspectives on Russian literature. The familiar campus stirred complex emotions as she and Thomas walked through its gates. Here she had once felt both at home and increasingly marginalized, valued for her knowledge but devalued for her aging feminine identity. Professor Volkova waited in the department office, her formidable presence unchanged despite the 3 years. Since Elena had last seen her, her silver hair was still pulled into a severe bun, her posture military straight, her gaze penetrating behind rectangular glasses. "Elena Mikhailovna," she greeted, using the formal style with Elena's patronymic. "Welcome back to us, and this must be your American husband." After introductions, Irina suggested they speak privately in her office. Thomas graciously excused himself to explore the campus, leaving the two women to their conversation. once seated. Behind her imposing desk, Irina studied Elena with an appraising gaze. "You look well. America agrees with you." "Thank you. I found fulfilling work there." "Yes, your book. Very impressive. And somewhat revealing our cultural attitudes toward women of a certain age." Irina's tone remained neutral, but Elena detected a hint of defensiveness. "I wrote my truth as I experienced it," Elena replied simply. "Many women, both Russian and American, have found it resonates with their own experiences." Irina nodded slowly. "That's precisely what I wish to discuss. Your perspective on these issues has caused some reflection within our department." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "We have begun to recognize that our implicit biases may have deprived us of valuable contributions from our more experienced female faculty." Elena maintained a composed expression, though internally she marveled at this unexpected acknowledgement. "I'm glad to hear that. Many brilliant women have much to offer well beyond youth." "Indeed." Irina straightened a pen on her desk. "Which brings me to a proposal. The university is establishing an international women's leadership institute, focused particularly on academic women navigating mid- and late-career transitions. We would like to invite you to serve as a visiting scholar for our inaugural semester." The offer was the last thing Elena had expected. Return to the institution that had gradually edged her out, work alongside former colleagues who had witnessed her diminishment. The proposition was both tempting and terrifying. "I'm honored by the invitation," she said carefully. "But my life and primary professional commitments are in Boston now." "Of course," Irina replied smoothly. "We envision a flexible arrangement, perhaps 2 months in St. Petersburg annually, with virtual engagements throughout the year. The university is prepared to be quite generous with compensation and accommodations." Elena promised to consider the offer, recognizing its significance beyond her personal circumstances. If her experience and subsequent success could help reshape institutional attitudes toward older women academics in Russia, wasn't that worth temporary discomfort? The lecture itself exceeded all expectations. The auditorium was filled beyond capacity, with students sitting in aisles and standing along the back wall. Elena spotted several former colleagues, some who had been allies, others who had participated in her marginalization. Thomas sat in the front row, his encouraging presence grounding her when memories of past professional humiliations threatened to undermine her confidence. Speaking first in Russian, then transitioning to English with Russian translation, Elena presented a nuanced analysis of how American scholars were reinterpreting classic Russian texts through contemporary lenses of gender, power, and resistance. She incorporated insights from both her academic background and her lived experience as a cultural bridge, illustrating how emigration had given her new perspectives on her literary heritage. The question period revealed intense interest, particularly from younger female students who seemed to recognize in Elena a model for international academic engagement. One young woman raised a question that cut to the heart of Elena's journey. "Your memoir describes how age discrimination pushed you to leave Russia, yet you found similar prejudices in America. Do you believe there's any culture where women can age without diminishment?" Elena considered this thoughtfully. "I've not found a cultural utopia free from age bias," she acknowledged, "but I've discovered that individual relationships and communities can transcend these limitations. The question isn't whether prejudice exists, it does everywhere, but whether we have the freedom and support to define ourselves beyond those prejudices." After the lecture, a reception allowed for more personal interactions. Several former colleagues approached with congratulations and thinly veiled surprise at her success. Others, particularly younger female faculty, sought advice about international opportunities and publishing. Throughout, Thomas remained at her side, his presence both protective and proudly supportive. That evening they attended a performance at the Mariinsky Theatre, Swan Lake, the quintessential Russian ballet experience. Dressed elegantly for the occasion, they joined the sophisticated crowd in the historic venue, its imperial blue and gold interior as magnificent as Elena remembered. "I used to save for months to afford the cheapest seats," she whispered to Thomas. As they settled into their prime orchestra location, "I would bring binoculars and still barely see the dancers' expressions." As the familiar Tchaikovsky score filled the hall and dancers transformed into swans before their eyes, Elena found herself transported between past and present. The ballet had not changed. The same choreography, the same music, the same story of transformation she had watched countless times before. But she was experiencing it through new eyes, shaped by her journey from mail-order bride prospect to established author and professor, from a woman shrinking into invisibility to one who had reclaimed her right to be seen. The week continued, with a blend of professional engagements and personal rediscovery. Elena led Thomas through the Hermitage Museum, delighting in his awe at the vast collection housed in the former Winter Palace. They explored Peterhof with its spectacular fountains, and the Peter and Paul Fortress, where generations of Russian history had unfolded in triumph and tragedy. Throughout their explorations, Elena found herself noticing things she had taken for granted during her years as a resident. The particular quality of light reflected in the canals, the elaborate wrought-iron details on bridges and balconies, the way Russians clustered in animated conversation regardless of the hour. She was seeing her homeland through bifocal vision, the familiar intimacy of a native combined with the appreciative distance of a visitor. Their most poignant outing was the visit to the cemetery where Eleanor's mother was buried. Thomas waited respectfully as Elena approached the simple granite headstone, placing a bouquet of her mother's favorite irises beside it and speaking softly in Russian. "I wish you could have met him, Mama," she said, glancing back at Thomas. "You would have seen past the differences in age and nationality to the goodness in him. You would have approved of my happiness, even if the path to it wasn't what either of us expected." Later, as they walked back through the cemetery's peaceful paths, Thomas asked what she had said. "I was introducing you," Elena explained, "and telling her that I've found a life that honors both who I was and who I've become." Thomas nodded in understanding. "Do you think she would have liked me?" Elena smiled, linking her arm through his. "She would have been suspicious at first. She was protective of me. But once she saw how you value me for my mind and spirit, not just as a woman of a certain age or nationality, she would have welcomed you as a son." As their time in St. Petersburg drew to a close, Elena and Thomas hosted a small gathering in a private room at a traditional Russian restaurant. The guest list reflected Elena's reconnected world, former university colleagues, childhood friends, the cafe owner who had recognized her, and most significantly, Natalia, who had flown in from Michigan specifically to see Elena in their shared homeland. The evening unfolded in a blend of languages, with conversations shifting fluidly between Russian and English. Elena observed with satisfaction how Thomas engaged with her friends, his basic Russian supplemented by expressive gestures and genuine interest that transcended language barriers. Midway through dinner, Natalia tapped her glass for attention and stood. "I want to propose a toast," she announced in English for Thomas's benefit, "to Elena, who left Russia believing her best years were behind her and returned to show us they were just beginning." The toast prompted others to share their perspectives on Elena's journey. Her former student, now a professor herself, spoke of how Elena's story had inspired her to pursue international opportunities despite institutional discouragement. An elderly colleague acknowledged how Elena's memoir had compelled him to reconsider his assumptions about female academics' career trajectories. As the evening concluded, Irina Volkova approached Elena and Thomas as they were saying goodbyes. "Have you considered my offer?" she asked directly. Elena exchanged a glance with Thomas, who nodded slightly, indicating his support for whatever she decided. "I'm interested," she replied, "but with conditions. I would like autonomy in developing programming that explicitly addresses age discrimination in academia, particularly against women." Irina's lips tightened momentarily, then relaxed into a reluctant smile. "You always were forthright, Elena Mikhailovna. Very well. We will negotiate terms that satisfy both our institutional needs and your advocacy priorities." As they returned to their hotel in the luminous midnight twilight characteristic of St. Petersburg's summers, Thomas asked Elena how she felt about the prospect of regular returns to her homeland. "It feels like the completion of a circle," she reflected. "Not an ending, but a reconnection that honors all parts of my journey. I left as someone being gradually erased by cultural attitudes about aging women. I return as someone whose voice is heard precisely because of the wisdom those years have given me." Thomas slipped his arm around her waist as they walked along the embankment. "And how does it feel to bring your younger American husband home, to meet everyone?" he teased gently. Elena laughed, recognizing the genuine question beneath the humor. "Surprisingly empowering. Not because you're younger or American, but because our relationship represents freedom from others' expectations. We chose each other based on genuine connection, not conventional criteria." Their final morning in St. Petersburg dawned with unexpected news. An email from Elena's publisher announcing that her memoir would be translated into Russian, with publication scheduled for the following spring. The Russian edition would include a new chapter specifically addressing her return visit and the changes she observed in both herself and her homeland. "This means I'll definitely need to return for a book launch," Elena told Thomas over breakfast. "Perhaps we could coordinate it with the visiting scholar position." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I could take a sabbatical from the engineering firm, maybe even teach a few guest lectures on sustainable energy. We could have a foot in both worlds for a while." As they packed for their departure, Elena found herself lingering over souvenirs they had collected: a hand-painted lacquer box from a street vendor, books by contemporary Russian authors not yet translated into English, a small bronze replica of the bronze horseman statue that symbolized the city. Each item represented a thread connecting her past and present, her Russian roots and American branches. At the airport, Elena experienced a moment of powerful déjà vu, the same terminal where, 3 years earlier, she had departed alone, her life packed into a single suitcase, her future hanging on the promise of a man she knew only through letters and video calls. Now she was leaving with a husband who had seen her at her most vulnerable and recognized her true worth, returning to a life built on authentic connection rather than compromise. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas said as they waited to board. Elena smiled, taking his hand. "I was thinking about thresholds, those moments when we step from one reality into another. Last time I crossed this threshold, I was leaving everything familiar for an unknown future. Now I'm crossing back and forth between worlds that both feel like home in different ways." The flight back to Boston gave Elena time to process the complex emotions of their visit. She began drafting the new chapter for the Russian edition of her memoir, reflecting on how returning to St. Petersburg had allowed her to reclaim her past rather than abandon it. The city was no longer associated primarily with diminishment and invisibility, but had been reframed through the lens of her newfound confidence and purpose. Upon their return, life resumed its rhythm, enriched by their experiences. Elena divided her time between teaching, writing, and developing curriculum for the Women's Leadership Institute in St. Petersburg. Thomas advanced in his engineering career while supporting Elena's increasingly international professional commitments. Their home became a gathering place for friends from diverse backgrounds, creating a community that transcended conventional boundaries of age, nationality, and expectation. In November, almost 4 years after Elena's arrival in America, she received a phone call that brought her journey full circle. The Dean of International Programs at Boston University wanted to discuss establishing a formal exchange partnership with St. Petersburg University, with Elena serving as the primary coordinator. Your unique position as faculty at both institutions makes you ideal for this role, the Dean explained, and your personal narrative of cultural bridge building adds particular resonance to the program. As she hung up the phone, Elena found herself marveling at how completely her life had transformed. From a desperate gamble on a mail-order bride arrangement to becoming a cultural ambassador, formally connecting the two worlds that had shaped her identity, it was a path she could never have envisioned. That evening, as snow began falling outside, their living room windows, Elena and Thomas sat before the fireplace, discussing the new opportunity and its implications for their future. It would mean more travel, more administrative responsibilities, Elena noted, watching the dancing flames, but also more opportunity to create meaningful connections between students and faculty from both countries. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. It seems like the natural evolution of everything you've been building. Your story has always been about bridging worlds, between youth and age, between cultures, between expectations and possibilities. Elena reached for his hand, still marveling at how perfectly it fit with hers, despite their different journeys to this shared moment. Our story, she corrected gently. Later that night, as Thomas slept beside her, Elena stood at their bedroom window watching the snow transform the garden into a glistening wonderland. The scene reminded her of winter nights in St. Petersburg, yet she felt no nostalgic longing, no sense of displacement. She had arrived at a place of integration rather than division, where her Russian past and American present existed not in opposition, but in creative tension. The mail-order bride rejected for being too old had discovered that age was not a liability, but an asset when embraced with authenticity and purpose. The woman who had once sought security through compromise had found fulfillment through courage. The foreigner who had arrived with one suitcase and a broken heart had created a home expansive enough to embrace multiple identities and possibilities. As spring approached once more, Elena received an invitation that symbolized her remarkable journey. The International Women's Leadership Summit requested that she deliver the keynote address at their annual conference, focused that year on reinvention and resilience after 50. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had left Russia believing 50 marked the beginning of her decline, only to discover it was actually the threshold to her most authentic and impactful chapter. On the morning of the conference, as she prepared, her remarks in the hotel suite provided for keynote speakers, Thomas helped adjust the silk scarf that added a touch of color to her elegant suit. "Nervous?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the same admiration and love that had guided her through the darkest moments of her journey. Elena shook her head, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. "Not nervous," she replied. "Grateful." Taking a deep breath, she gathered her notes and headed for the stage, ready to share the wisdom earned through her extraordinary path from rejection to recognition, from invisibility to influence, from compromise to authentic connection. As she looked out at the audience of women eager to hear her story, Elena thought of all the invisible threads that had led her to this moment. The painful rejection that had actually been liberation, the desperate gamble that had yielded unexpected treasure, the man who had seen her soul when others saw only her age. And she began with the words that had become her personal mantra, the truth she hoped every woman would eventually discover. Our greatest chapters often begin precisely when the world tells us our story should be ending. Age is not the closing of possibility, but the opening of wisdom. And love, real love, sees beyond the surface to the essential self that grows more luminous, not less, with each passing year. Thomas, watching from the front row, smiled in recognition of their shared truth. And Elena, standing confidently in the spotlight once deemed inappropriate for a woman of her years, knew with absolute certainty that she had finally come home, not to a place, but to herself. The mail-order bride, rejected for being too old, had found something far more valuable than she had ever sought. Not merely security or companionship, but the profound freedom that comes from being truly seen, genuinely valued, and authentically loved. Not despite her age, but because of all the wisdom, strength, and beauty those years had cultivated within. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Elena welcomed this chapter and all those yet to come, in a story that continued to unfold with grace, purpose, and the quiet certainty that life's most meaningful adventures often begin exactly when we least expect them, and exactly when we most need them. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.